Hey now, welcome to another episode of the EXP Share Podcast, episode number 2. My name is Matt. With me, as always, is Will. And today we're going to be breaking down tournaments across the globe. We're going to be talking about Knoxville. We're going to be talking about Melbourne. We're going to be talking about Singapore and some of the deck lists that did well during those tournaments. Will, how are we doing today?
Doing great, can't complain. Really excited to talk Pokemon. So it's been too long. I haven't played. I'm itching. I'm itching to play. I'm itching to talk about it. So
Yeah, no, we got some good stuff to talk about today. We got a few different deck lists to review. Some new things. I know in the past we have talked about different decks that are more meta relevant. Charizard, Gholdengo is now going to be something we're going to be talking about more. Roaring Moon is something more we're going to be talking about more. There's a bunch of new deck lists that we're going to be exploring today and kind of seeing what's next for the next few months here while we are stuck here in this, what I would argue, stale meta being in Paldean Fates. But before we get into that, Will, how's life? How are things? What have you been up to outside of Pokemon?
I went to Chicago this weekend. It was my lovely wife's 30th birthday, so that was a really nice weekend.
Happy
No
birthday.
Pokemon, traveling, seeing old friends. What about you? What's new with you?
Just work, stressing out with work. That's really about it. I mean, I think that's why we do these things, right? To escape the realities of life sometimes. Oddly enough, I'm actually going to be going out of towns this weekend for something related with my wife. It's our 2 year anniversary, so we're going to be hitting the coast here in California. We're going to make some trips over to the Napa Valley area and we do a little wine tasting. I'm not a big fan of wine, as I'm sure I've said many, many times. I don't really dig on wine, so this will be a new experience for me. So I'm pretty excited about it. But yeah, that's really about it. Work
Well,
and Pokemon.
congratulations
That's
on
really
the
taking my
anniversary. Maybe
yeah,
you'll
yeah.
develop a
Thank you.
taste because I think my wife didn't love wine either until I started to kind of really push it on her. We did wine tastings. We went to France and kind of grew
Wow.
on her. It's an acquired taste, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Are you a wine guy? I don't know. Are you a wine guy? I know we've shared some drinks before, but I don't never seen you drink some wine. I've never seen that.
I mean, I'll drink wine. Yeah, I think it's not my number one choice, but I can get down
Sure.
some. I'll get down some wine. It just for certain occasions. Big events like an anniversary. I think it's a good thing, and fancy dinners. I might not want to order a beer, or like a cocktail. So
Sure,
wine,
sure.
wine goes well. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
back to Pokemon, talking about this meta. You say it's stale, but I feel like there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. I feel like the meta is shifting despite no new cards really being added, and we can get
Yeah.
into that, as we look at the results. There were three big events, like you said, Knoxville. There was one in Singapore, and there was one in Melbourne. But obviously, being American, we're gonna probably focus a lot of time on on our own big regional. You know, we have they're getting bigger and bigger. 1,367 Masters players. These numbers are getting crazy, but the results are interesting. I don't think Gardevoir has won a regional yet. I don't believe this format. So it's
Someone said that, and Gardevoir's won a regional before. I don't know what regional it was. It was some time ago. Obviously, Garatina's been just taking over the meta. We're going to talk more about that later on. But Gardevoir has won something in the past somewhere. I don't know exactly where that is, but I believe this is number 2. This is only the second regional it's taken. It's been a very popular deck. It's a very good deck. We all know that. It's going to get torn apart come rotation in just about a month or so now, pretty close.
mhm.
But yeah, Gardevoir, this might be its last final run, at least here in the States. We can take a look at that deck list now. Might as well just go ahead and jump right into that. Gardevoir taking the whole thing over in Knoxville. What's really interesting about this deck list here is that Zacian has actually made a comeback. Quite a few deck lists have been removing that Zacian. They're trying to get rid of that 2 prize liability. And
Mhm.
Zacian being included into this deck list and took the whole thing. Obviously, a big heavy hitter, really good for the matchup against Charizard, able to take those big knockouts. But in addition to that, 2 reversal energy. I'm not sure if that's like the common thing or not. You're much more
Yeah,
familiar with Gardevoir. Is that a common thing?
Yeah, I've been following pretty closely how this list has changed, especially, after the more recent set list, I mean, cards that were added, Scream Tail. A lot of people were adding Luxurious Cape. Uh, you
Hmm.
know, Sort of if attach the Cape to Scream Tail, it basically can hit as hard as, that Zacian V. Well, from what I've
Mm,
heard from all the biggest Guardy players, they were saying, just making sure that you get that cape, when you need it is a lot more difficult than just dropping Zacian when you need him. There's a lot of cards that will get you Zacian. You
mm,
have Fog Crystal, uh, you have Ultra Ball. Especially once you've thinned the deck down, you can rod back that Zacian. You can't necessarily, you cannot rod back a tool. So just getting that cape when you needed it, and then also attaching it to to your Screamtail when you need it is much more difficult. So Zacian's really left for, that last big knockout that you might not be able to reach with a Shining Arcana Gardevoir that kind of just caps out, especially if you're not behind in prizes. With the reversal, you can really hit hard, hit those big numbers, get a Charizard. But in order to hit a Charizard without a reversal, last knockout, Zacian really is just, there's no other card like it. So, yeah, there was a lot of testing. I think there were some decks that um, removed Zacian because they didn't want the two prize liability. There's some decks that used the cape. I guess it becomes Screamtail becomes a two prize liability if you use Luxurious Cape. So you'd also kind of use that at the end of game, but it just seems that Zacian's a little bit more reliable. And this, to me, I'm just looking through the list, looks pretty typical, honestly. Rare candy numbers kind of shift, fog crystal numbers can kind of shift here and there. I would say the biggest, most dramatic difference between major set lists, I'm sure if you look at other Guardies, you'll see VIP Pass has been actually dropped from a
yeah.
significant number of Guardy lists. This happens to be a VIP Pass list. I think VIP Pass is a little bit more consistent, but considering also how many people play Avery, and you don't necessarily want to be super wide early, so you don't need those VIP passes. You only have a couple Ralts, and you just depend on the Mirage step so that, you know, you're not spreading super wide immediately and can get Avery'd and then not necessarily have the rod to get those guys back, and it slows you down. So um, it's been back and forth. This is the most consistent list. You can do both. You can get set up and do only Ralts if you and just ball up normally and not do the Mirage step. Use the Mirage step if you need to. It just got it's the most flexible and it's got the most options. Two reversals also allow you to not even necessarily have to drop a Gardevoir EX early.
Mm,
Just no two
hmm
prize liability. Just slap a reversal when, because you're really not, your engine's really not going till turn two, turn three, and that other deck might already have two prizes, so the reversal is always going to work. You slap the reversal, um, and attach, on a previous turn, maybe have attached one or two psychic energies to that Gardevoir, and now you're doing, you know, 180, 200, and you're potentially getting those knockouts without even having to use Gardevoir EX at all and accelerate energy from the discard pile. So yeah, really not seeing anything too dramatically different. Um, even the trainers, four Ionos is kind of pretty typical now. Uh, Stadium lists have been changing. I feel like the stadium lines were a little bit thicker before in the past
Yeah, yeah.
when Path to the Peak was a little more ubiquitous, but I think Path is really not a big threat right now. The only major deck that's playing Path is Giratina, and I think
Mm.
Gardevoir has a pretty decent Giratina matchup, even without having to deal with the path. And also, Giratinos now are only playing three; they're not playing a full four like they used to. So you have four outs basically. You have your vacuum, you have your two stadiums, and you have a worker. So you have more outs than most Giratina lists play. So you're actually okay. And yeah, I don't really have anything else to say about this list unless you have any other um, specific notes.
No, nothing major on Gardevoir. I will admit it's one of those decks I know it's a good deck. I know it's around. I've played it plenty of times on the ladder, but it's not something I'm not super interested in. It's not something I'm going to be picking up and sleeving and playing at my next local tournament. So I think you put it very well. So good stuff there. I do want to touch on Ian Robb's list with the Garatina. As we already know, Garatina has just been all over the place. I would consider the best deck in format right now. I know Charizard for the longest time was considered that deck, but Giratina just kind of does it all right now. You have that path in there, as you mentioned before, when we were talking about Guardy, the three path, super consistent, easy way to just slow down your opponent. And the only harm it really does to you is it might shut down Greninja. But at that point, when you're putting down Path, it's going to do a lot more harm than good when compared to, say, using any other stadium. I think the other really cool thing about this list is just how consistent it is. And with the addition of Crisis Shot, I believe that's what it's called, Technical Machine Crisis Shot, that Cramorant essentially becomes a free 280 damage attacker. That's insane. I think we're going to see a lot of that. We're going to talk about Dortmund in just a few moments here, but that Cramorant with the Crisis Shot is really going to just say it's going to take crazy knockouts. I'm really excited to see how that plays out. I'm not super excited to be on the receiving end of that massive attack, but I think Cramorant is really going to see a lot of play with that Crisis Shot. But regarding this deck list, though, as you mentioned before, pretty standard stuff. 4 Jet Energy to get your Comfy around, the Spiritomb in there to go ahead and act as a counter for your Genesect Vs and the Mew matchup, and the Mirage Gates to just go ahead and accelerate a bunch of energy late game whenever you need it. So a solid list. Lost Zone is going to be around for a long time. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. And it's been good since they got released. And I will say that I think that Lost Zone is a little bit like Gardevoir, going to require a little bit higher of a skill level to go ahead and master and pilot well. I think a lot of the times people just assume, oh, Lost Zone, it's an auto win, doesn't really matter what you're doing. No, Lost Zone requires a high skill level to go ahead and play well at the very least. Anyone can pick up a deck and play anything, but I will say a Lost Zone, again, just requires a higher skill level that really makes your mind and your strategy, you have to be at your peak in order to play this thing well. No pun intended.
I feel like, I mean, both Lost Zone and Gardevoir are both really similar to me in terms of
Mm,
really high skill cap. I think they're the most difficult to pilot decks in the format right now. There's a
agreed.
lot of actions per turn. You're churning through your deck. I think Lost Zone is to another level even because you're now resource managing. You have different types of energy. You have to make sure to not Lost Zone the right energies.
Hmm.
But I think both of them are really, really high skill cap, but also, you know, have the most flexibility, the most ability to kind of do whatever they want if things go well. The one problem with Lost Zone is, you have one bad flower selecting, one bad colors experiment that you draw
Yep.
into like all the cards that you need, and you end up having to Lost Zone things that you don't want to. I do think this deck can sometimes just be a complete pile. Gardevoir a little bit too, but just not nearly as bad. So, like I said, high skill cap, high possibility of doing well. Doing well if things go your way, but also a high possibility of kind of prizing the wrong things. Gardevoir has a lot of one ofs. You prize your Mirage Step. You prize
Hmm.
your only two Gardevoir EXs. You can kind of really screw yourself. The one thing I do also want to call out, I'll call it out in this deck list, and also call it out when we kind of just scroll through just the overall results of Knoxville. Um, Lost Zone in general, I think, is coming back. Not just Lost Zone Tina, but like just straight single prize Lost Box or even the old style of Lost Box. I think one of the top performing decks, whether it was top 8 or top 16, had Dragonite V in it, like the
Yeah, it did.
old
Hmm.
school Lost Zone decks. So those are coming back up. And I think what's really interesting about this format is it's kind of fluctuating with the presence of Miraidon and Iron Hands. I think LAIC, which was basically the first uh, competition in this new format. Um, Tons of people were playing Gardevoir. I think it was the number one most played deck, and it didn't win. I actually don't remember what won LAIC. It was Entei Valiant actually won a LAIC because I think
Was it?
when
Wow.
it's a lot of decks, there's a lot of Lost Zone and a lot of Gardevoir. When there's a lot of decks with little
Mhm.
guys, they can be picked off with Entei, and then Miraidon was second. So the little guys can be picked off with Iron Hands, and they can be picked off with Entei Valiants, just picking off and pinging for lots of damage. So it kind of becomes chicken. As Miraidon becomes more popular, the smaller decks become less popular, and as Miraidon becomes less popular, it allows these decks with smaller Pokemon like Lost Box and like Gardevoir to succeed. And so I think what has happened, if we look at the kind of arc of this format, which is a pretty dramatic arc, you start off with, Gardevoir and Lost Zone being ubiquitous, but not necessarily being able to pull it off at first. Then, because they were so popular, I think in later formats, Miraidon ended up being always like third, second or third. But
Mm,
as Miraidon was popular, the decks that have the best um, matchup against Miraidon, which is I think Charizard and then Tina, they rose to the top. Charizard and Tina dominated for the majority of this format, and then finally another two prize attack deck the only one that could take down Tina and Charizard was um, Roaring Moon, which we'll get to, as a two prize attacker Pokemon, like two prize basic attacker Pokemon deck became more popular in Roaring Moon. The thing that takes down Roaring Moon is Gardevoir and regular Lost Box, especially because Roaring Moon doesn't have an answer like Miraidon does with Iron Hands, because Iron Hands can take the 2-for-1 prize on the little guys.
right.
So it's interesting. I think Miraidon actually will start coming back now, maybe in the next regionals, Dortmund or Portland. We don't actually have one for another like 3 weeks or a month. I think
Yeah, it's
is
gonna be a while.
Vancouver is the next one. But um, oh, so the one other thing I will say, talking about this deck, is Spiritomb. I think Spiritomb is an incredibly good card. I think it's not just an answer for Mew. Mew was big, and Mew had no real top finishes, I think, at Knoxville. Also, we'll talk about it. Charizard didn't really have any top finishes, but Mew didn't have any
Yeah.
top finishes. And I think a lot more people are playing Spiritomb. And I think this card, you should think about teching this card into basically any deck you play if you're going to play a meta right now, because Spiritomb stops any basic Pokemon V's abilities, but all the top decks have basic Pokemon V. Charizard plays Rotom V. Rotom V is
Hmm.
stopped by Spiritomb. Charizard also plays Lumineon to get any supporter that it needs. If it's not able to set up, it gets that Arvin, and that Arvin then just starts the rare candy, Pidgeot, rare candy, Charizard. So if you can stop
Hmm.
Lumineon and you can stop Rotom V, I think you really slow down Charizard. Spiritomb also stops Moltres V. I think Moltres V is the card that allowed um, Roaring Moon to really become popular in this meta. No
Agreed.
older versions of Roaring Moon played Spiritomb. Played Galarian Moltres. It allows you to just reattach one energy every turn from the discard. That allows you to really keep consistently stringing attackers every turn. Three darkness energy per attack for Roaring Moon is difficult, but with energy switch, with dark patch, and with Moltres V, you're able to consistently get those three darkness energy every turn, even without having um, the Professor Seta's vitality, because that's also one thing that the newer Roaring Moon decks have removed. They've actually removed some Professor Zeta's vitality. The old ones used to play four, the new ones play
Right.
two, because you need to be able to play other supporter cards. You need to be able to boss, you need to be able to Iona when you need to slow your opponent down or kill certain Pokemon on their bench. So you can't be just playing Zetas every turn. And that's how the old decks used to string attackers every turn is you play Zeta every turn, but then you have no opportunity to slow down your opponent. Um, so yes, Spiritomb right now I think is the one card you should be thinking about teching into your deck. It stops Charizard, it stops Roaring Moon, and it stops Mew, of course, which I think has just been like until it rotates, it will be a threat. So if you can stop those three decks that are basically tier one, I think you're gonna have a good time. One other thing, and I guess we can start looking at other deck lists. I guess we can look at just the regular Lost box. I think the top performing just regular Lost Zone box was the deck that got second. I believe, yes. I mean, this is Kyogre, which is crazy.
Yeah.
A very
Yeah.
specific flavor of it. But also, this deck played Mawile. I also think Azul played this Mawile, but I think
Yeah.
fewer and fewer decks are just um, playing tons of Switch. But if you run out of switch cards, Roaring Moon only has two of them. Charizard, I think, only has one switch card in their deck right now. So
Hmm.
they're just hoping not to run into Snorlax, basically. But you run out of switch cards, you tempting trap your opponent, and that is it. They are done. You just keep on tempting trap every turn, and they will deck out. So it says during your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon cannot retreat. During your next turn, the defending Pokemon takes 90 more damage from attacks, but that's irrelevant. The Pokemon basically can't retreat if they don't have any switch cards left in their deck. So I watched the stream this weekend. Uh, I think it was a top eight match. Uh, this deck versus a Roaring Moon. He had already, or he had to Squawkabilly away two of his switch cards, the only two in his deck. The next turn, bossed up a Greninja who can't be, you know, sated to. You can't. No, you can't. There is no switch card. You can't do anything. There's no retreat.
Yeah,
Doesn't matter.
stuck.
So you're stuck. He didn't have any way to get out of it, and decked him out. So that is an interesting card. I think more Lost Box decks will be playing this. I don't like, decking out. I don't like Snorlax stall. I don't really like it, Mawile, but it is something you should be thinking about too. So maybe putting in a couple more switches in your decks if you're playing Charizard, if you're playing Roaring Moon. Got to think about that.
Yeah, one other thing I want to add on to the Spiritomb thing, you had talked about the other things that it can counter, is that
Mhm.
Pidgeot V actually in that deck
Oh,
list. A lot of people are using that Pidgeot V, they drop the Forest Seal Stone on it, they use it, and then I think it's Vanishing Wings is the name of the ability, and they just
yes.
pop it off the bench, and that's it. It's done. It's no longer a prize liability, and it's finished. So
Hmm.
I was at Locals on Monday, and I saw this quite a bit. I saw this Pidgeot get dropped on the bench. Here's Forest Seal Stone. They take it off, and that's it. It's done. So really cool tech, but again, with Spiritomb, that ability is null. It's void. Forest Silstone still goes through Spiritomb's ability, but that Pidgeot stays on the bench. So I think you're absolutely right. I think Spiritomb is a really good meta call, and definitely something you're going to start seeing. Just it's a one of just splash it in your deck. It's a very splashable card, and you just kind of let it sit on the bench. You let it just kind of hinder your opponent a little bit. Really, really cool concept there. I think you're right. I think come rotation, especially with Path getting rotated, you're going to see Spiritomb just a little bit more. It's going to become a little more relevant and definitely going to be a little more popular when it comes to deck lists that typically wouldn't play something like that. You have to think that's going to be in Giratina Lost Zone. You have to think it's going to be in there in some capacity. But I can definitely see it being just again splashable and all these different kind of deck concepts that you wouldn't expect it. And honestly, playing a card that you would not expect, something that's not outside of the typical deck list, is such a spicy little bit that you can add into your deck list that really just elevates your play and it can catch your opponent off guard really, really easily. And when you do that, you put yourself in a much better position for success. So Spiritomb, it's everywhere. I got way too many copies of it. I'm very happy that I have way too many copies of it, and definitely something I'm going to be holding on to. So, Pidgeot V, pretty cool concept actually. When this first card first came out, I was like, "What's the point? I don't really get it. Not very cool." But pair that with Forest Silstone, really,
It
really cool.
it also one of the other main reasons why you play a Pidgeot V is it prevents you from decking out. You put it on your
Yep. Yep.
if your last card in deck, you draw it, you put it on your bench, you send it back into the deck. So you every turn you have something there to draw. You draw that Pidgeot, bench it back in the deck, draw it, bench it back in the deck. So yes, you can't be Snorlax stalled if you're playing Lost Zone box. You can't be um, stalled by a tempting trap because you have an out. So Pidgeot is pretty cool.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you actually, and this is something you had mentioned in our previous episode. I don't remember exactly what you had said, but you said something along the lines of like Gardevoir EX is going to win another thing. You something on those lines before rotation comes. Maybe we were talking about Moonlit Hill or something. I don't know what you said, but you had essentially called, "Hey, Gardevoir is going to win another tournament," and it did. It took Knoxville. Are you surprised by it at all? I mean, obviously you called it, but I was not expecting Gardevoir to take the whole thing. Obviously, you're thinking of Giratina or Charizard, maybe even a Mew, but Gardevoir was not on my radar at all. So, what were your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, if you looked at the last two tournaments in America, um, it was Portland and then Charlotte. Portland was
Mhm.
Ross Cawthon, who is a former, world's not not winner, but I think he got he's been top 32 at Worlds before. Ross Cawthon. That's where he debuted basically the Roaring Moon deck that is kind
Mm,
of ubiquitous right now. I like Roaring Moon. I've been playing Roaring Moon since it came out as a card. It never really had the juice. It was the deck list was never perfect. And I think once people saw that deck list, he got top 32. He didn't get top
mm,
8 or anything. It wasn't it didn't wow everybody, but for whatever reason, Ross Cawthon is a popular player. He's around on Twitter. Also, J.W. Krewall, who is in um, Andrew Mahone's testing group.
mm, mm,
So Andrew Mahone, Tricky Jim, the biggest Pokemon YouTuber there is. Um, his close friend J.W. Krewall, who he does a podcast with. You should listen to a tag team podcast if after you listen to our podcast. If you're looking for more podcasts to listen to, J.W. Krewall has been screaming from the rooftops that since Portland, since Ross Cawthon made that list, that this um, Roaring Moon deck is the answer. It can keep up with Charizard. Everyone, Charizard has been the BDIF basically for so long. No one can hit that
mm.
330 HP. Roaring Moon can hit that 330 HP. It can knock out anything. So he's been shouting from the rooftops. And then the next regional right after that, Charlotte, Roaring Moon immediately jumps up to like 15%. So it caught on. J.W. Krewall's evangelizing worked, and it got top 8. So especially now that it was evangelized, it gained a decent amount of fans, and then after getting top 8, that's where even more people are going to recognize it. And I think in Knoxville, I believe it was. Well, let's look. Have you ever used PokeStats.live? I think it is. It's one of my favorite websites to use when looking at Pokemon information. Um, gives you breakdowns. It gives you the breakdowns of what the top performing decks were.
Hmm.
It was actually more popular than Giratina Vstar, which is crazy to me. Giratina
Wow.
Vstar has won the last 2 regionals. Roaring Moon passed it finally. So yeah, crazy results that it was that much of the meta. Charizard still has been the top deck, but it's getting close. And then if you look at actually the day 2 and how Roar Moon actually performed, not only was it number 2 deck, but it was the number 1 deck into day 2. So that means it outperformed its day 1 ranking, and Charizard fell off. Charizard became the third most popular deck in day 2 that made day 2. So Roar Moon had a really, really big pop off, and I think maybe one of the reasons why I expected Gardevoir to do well is because it has a good matchup against Roar Moon. Roar Moon
Mm.
has no answers against a single prize deck. It can't keep up that prize trade. It's gonna Gardevoir's always gonna take 2 prizes for every one that Roar Moon takes against those little baby Gardevoirs.
Mhm.
So yeah, even with a type advantage, Roar Moon is not necessarily a good matchup against that Gardevoir.
Speaking of the fall of Charizard, as we're just seeing right here on the screen, this stat, and for those folks who are listening at home, we're talking about day 2 here at Knoxville, I believe is the tournament we're discussing right now. Roaring Moon, 20% in day 2. Garatina V-Star lost some 16, almost 17%. Charizard EX, the former Titan of the meta, below 12%. Is this a time where Charizard's finally been dethroned? I will say I think post rotation, once we get rid of Path to the Peak, we get Buddy Poffin in that deck list. I do think Charizard's just going to blow back up again. But right now, Charizard's completely fallen off. I'm not going to say it's completely out of it, but there was nothing in the top 32. I think it made like 33rd place, 34th place.
Yeah,
It was still right there. It's still a good play. If you're playing it now, keep on playing it. It's still a good deck. It's a lot of fun. But that being said, Charizard is really
yeah,
taking a dive here. I think people just kind of figured it out, and I think more importantly, people are teching for it. They're playing decks to go up against it because it does take up a lion's share of your day 1 meta deck list. So, again, Charizard kind of falling off here. Has it been dethroned? Can we say Giratina V-Star is officially BDIF and Charizard's maybe tied for 2 with Roaring Moon? But where are we at with things?
I mean, yeah. I mean, Giratina won the last 2 tournaments. It didn't pull it off this time, but I think, you could have made that claim that Giratina was the BDI for the last few weeks because it's beaten Charizard. But with Charizard not even making top 32, that's a fall off. That's an indisputable fall off.
Significant. Yeah.
Yeah, I think people are teching in those Devo TMs. I think with Roaring
Hmm.
Moon being such a big part of the meta, and I think Roaring Moon has a good Charizard matchup, I think it's going to be difficult. But like I said, it's like a rock, paper, scissors. As Gardevoir becomes bigger and Roaring Moon falls off, which I think it will. I think despite Roaring Moon doing so well and converting so well, I think the results of this tournament will actually cause it to become a smaller portion of the meta. I think this was its peak. Portland into Charlotte into Knoxville. Roaring Moon is at its peak here. I think it will fall off a little bit. I think looking at the results, I think Lost Box and I think Gardevoir, people will start picking up those decks again. I think people had put those decks away. They're a little too difficult to navigate and they weren't getting the results anyway. So why am I going to play a deck that's hard to navigate at the regional and doesn't have results? I think people will pick those decks up, and with those decks being picked up and Roaring Moon falling off, I think Charizard might be okay. Although, I think Charizard also has a bad matchup against Lost Box and Gardevoir, frankly. So the only one that I feel like Giratina just has a good matchup against everything. It has no weaknesses.
Yeah.
It just,
Yeah.
has no real bad matchups. If you look at its matchup, if you look up the percentages win-loss records against every other meta deck, it's like 50% across the board. That's why I think Giratina stays relevant regardless of the ebbs and flows of other decks, because Giratina basically has no bad matchups. It's just a little bit difficult to pilot and can brick a little bit, but
Yeah.
I think it's consistently going to be in the top three. It might not always win. There's going to be off weeks and on weeks for Giratina, but I think Giratina is that deck.
Speaking of decks that are rising, we had talked about Roaring Moon already, how it's on the rise, it's there, it's at its peak. I think the deck is going to continue to do well. I think Dortmund is going to be another example of that. But something a lot of people didn't see coming, and it was considered a meme for a long time. This is something I picked up early on. Gholdengo, piloted by Lil Dark for your LDF, whatever you want to call him. I had no idea his name was Matthew. That's my name as well, so
I
I thought
didn't
that
know
was
that
kind of
either.
crazy.
That's cool.
Yeah, I don't think anyone. He's LDF, right? That's all
Yeah.
you know him as. But May Day 2 with Gholdengo Palkia. Do we have that deck list pulled up
Yes,
somewhere? I know
I'll
we
pull it
have a
up.
couple different deck lists actually pulled up. We have one from, I think it was like a Tokyo regional, and then we're going to be able to pull up LDF's deck list here. But he kind of went into detail about why he picked number 30 right there.
Top
He
30.
actually
All right.
talked a little bit about why he had picked up this deck list. He was talking about how he wasn't going to play the deck. He had brought it with him, and it wasn't, I believe, until the night before the regional started where him and his test group basically said, "Hey, like this is a play, dude. Like you should definitely go for it." I love Gholdengo. I think it's such a cool deck. It's a lot of fun to play. I think that's a big difference here, right? We talked about Lost Zone being a little more complicated. You got to really be on your game to pilot that deck well. Gardevoir, very similar concept. Gholdengo is a little more straightforward, I will say. It's a little more linear. That was kind of the problems in the beginning, though, right? A lot of people, including myself, were playing Gholdengo with Scizor. They were playing it just strictly on its own. Add in that Greninja, add in the Palkia, and you add an extra layer of depth. And I think that's a really important thing for Gholdengo because, again, previously it was just a beat stick, right? Let me get a bunch of energy in my hand. Let me get those superior energy retrievals and just start taking big knockouts. That's fine and dandy, but again, once your opponent kind of figures out what you're doing, here comes Ionos, here comes Roxanne's, and it really just completely destroys your hand. With this list here, you're able to kind of bring that energy back. Again, you're able to threat with the Greninja, and it's just a really, really fun deck list. I think what's really cool about this list here as well is it's a 1-1 line of Palkia. That's a little scary. You play the heavy ball just in case you prize the Palkia V, not the Vstar. Obviously, V's are the only thing you can get with the heavy ball. But you play the heavy ball just in case you prize that Palkia and you're able to get that card back online. So really, really cool list. And I think the other spicy tech when it comes, maybe I wouldn't call it a tech, but an interesting take on this list. 3 steel energy. You only need 3 to play, or I'm sorry, you only need 1 to actually get Gholdengo online to use that attack. All the energy needs to be sitting in your hand. but 3 energy isn't even enough to have 4 Gholdengo online. You're never gonna have 4 on the bench ready to go anyway. It's probably not something you wanna do. But that being said, 3 still energy. If you price 2 of them, you're running with 1 energy the entire game. Obviously, that's probably a low chance of that occurring. That being said, really, really cool deck list. And I think because of LDF's success in Knoxville, you got to think this deck is going to see more play. I think a lot of people already like the concept of Gholdengo. They just needed that extra push, that extra motivation to actually build the list and bring it to a regional. So I'm excited for the future of Gholdengo. I think the card's actually going to do even better post rotation. Again, once Path goes, I think you're going to see a lot more Gholdengos running around in your next regionals come April and May.
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the things holding this back is I think this format has been so fast. You know,
Yeah.
VIP pass, every deck can set up really, really fast and really consistently if you hit those VIP
Mhm.
pass. And when you have those big basics like Miraidon, like Roaring Moon, they're just big, they're hefty, and they're doing stuff. They're attacking turn one. And I
Right.
think the format really, really slows down. It allows evolution decks to thrive a little bit more, and you can buddy poffin, you know. So buddy poffin
Hmm.
helps the decks that have small basics, but those big basic decks like Miraidon, Roaring Moon, I think they're going to fall off and fall off hard because without VIP pass, without access to buddy poffin, they're gonna you're gonna be reliant on just nest balls. We don't have really any other ball search ultra balls. You know, it's gonna be difficult to set up a full bench. Obviously, Miraidon
Great ball. We got great ball.
got great ball. Obviously, Miraidon has tandem unit to get help set up, but I think
Right.
for the most part the format's going to be relatively slow. But Gholdengo has built-in draw, has Buddy Poffin. Is 260 is just a pretty big number. You know, no one's
Hmm.
going to be knocking out Gholdengo's turn. Turn one, turn two, and hitting those big numbers. So it stocks on the rise. Also, just notice Spiritomb in there. I bet
Yep.
that's not just for that new matchup. I think that Spiritomb is important. So um, that is a spicy tech that I don't think I've seen in every deck list. I think that's definitely helped LDF probably succeed in this
Yeah.
weekend's Knoxville.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations to him. He did very well. Took home $1,000 cash with them as well. So he paid for this deck list at 48.26 and more with that winning. So good for him. Congratulations. That being said, I think we could touch on Roaring Moon a little bit more because obviously this is like the big deck. Everyone's really excited about this. Moon Rising, right? I mean, it's as you mentioned before, it's at its peak. It's right there. It's going to be impacted obviously because of rotation, but right now, Roaring Moon is just it's a deck to play. As I mentioned before, I was at a local tournament here on Monday, and Roaring Moon was all over the place. A lot of people were playing it, and people were doing well with it. I know you know a lot about the deck. This is something you've been on since the very beginning. I've never really caught on to the deck. It's never something I've really been excited about. But what about that deck just gets you out of bed in the morning saying, all right, this is what I'm taking to my local today?
So yeah, let's open up a deck list and I'll walk you through. There's actually basically two major builds of it right now, and I'll show you my favorite one. This is JW Kreewall's list. He got 10th. He got 10th. Brought home a fat $2,000, and
Yeah.
so I think this deck is. I mean, obviously, I'm pretty new, but the deck that I had the most success with is Miraidon, and Miraidon pre this format, which added Iron Hands. So there really is no answers to single prize decks. There really is no answers if you fall behind in prizes. This deck is just go hard, go fast, get prizes ahead of your opponent, and just like keep on chugging and taking prizes before they can catch up with you. And that's what this deck is. It's really good for regionals, in my opinion, because you're not going to go always to time. Those Gardevoir decks I think are really strong, but you're going to 50 minutes. Lost box, you're going to 50 minutes. You don't get any rest between rounds. So that's another reason why I really like these big basic decks. No evolving, no really long matches. They go fast. And more specifically, I mean, what's not to love? It's a Salamence. He's a dark type, awesome dragon that can take one hit knockouts
Yeah.
on anything. He just says,
Yeah.
frenzy gouging, you're dead. Sorry, like goodbye. So what's not to love about this deck? This is JW Kreewall's list. So one of the things that people have been teching into this deck is because um, Roaring Moon doesn't really have comeback mechanics, and you might not be,
Mhm.
you know, your opponent might not be leaving up two prizers in their active. You just need even more boss. You need even more gust. So two bosses, but you also have two Pokemon catchers. Some of the deck lists don't play Pokemon catchers. Some of them do. I think Pokemon catchers are actually pretty good. It's just boss on a coin flip on an item.
Mhm.
Um, you might want to Iono, you might want to Judge, you might want to Professor Seda to accelerate that energy because you don't have enough energy on your Roaring Moon to get that attack off. So you might want to use another supporter that turn, but then you still need to boss up something from their bench. You use a Pokemon catcher and 50-50 chance that you get that gust up, and those aren't bad odds when you need to do a bunch of things all at once in one turn. Um, Otherwise, I mean, this is basically Ross Cawthon's list. Um, the two catchers are the difference from that original Portland list that got top 32. I think one of the other techs that Ross Cawthon actually, you know, created and added into his deck, other than the Moltres, which helps accelerate and stream energy, is this emergency jelly. I think this emergency jelly
Mhm.
is really, really important. Sometimes there are those times where you have to take a frenzied gouging knockout when you don't necessarily want to, because you take frenzied gouging, you do 200 damage to yourself, and you leave yourself with 30 HP remaining. And at that point, anything can knock you out.
Right.
They can promote a Comfy and do Joust for 30 and, kill you. So, or whatever, Cramorant or Charmander. And then if you don't have a boss next turn, then you're only taking one prize, and then the prize becomes bad. So you attach this emergency jelly, you frenzy gouge even, and you actually leave yourself with 150 HP left because the emergency jelly heals you. And 150 HP is out of range of Cramorant. It's out of range of a lot of basics. It's out of range of Sableye. It really helps you survive that one more turn. So that's something that Ross has created since Portland. Other than that, yeah, Moltres obviously not only streams your energy, but is a V Pokemon. So there are two Force Seal Stones in here that just helps add that consistency. Um, Other than that, obviously, yeah, Squawkabilly, Mew, just you're drawn. I can, have been practicing a lot with this deck. You can draw through half your deck on turn one. You
Yeah. Yeah.
Squawk, you Mew,
Seen
you
it.
research, you use your Pokestops, obviously, and you use your V-Star ability, and you've gone through half your deck. You've set up, and you're ready to go for the rest of the game. Um, what's not to love? You can do whatever you want that turn one. You hit hard. You can frenzy gouging anything turn one. Like, yeah, this deck is great. I think, unfortunately, post rotation, Moltres, which is the thing that I think allowed this deck to really prosper, is rotating. It's going to have to be
Mhm.
completely rebuilt and kind of reimagined. I've seen some Japanese lists that are playing Darkrai V and Vstar,
Mhm.
which is a way that this deck was trying to be built previously. I think one of the reasons why Darkrai V-Star actually becomes even better, though, post rotation is there's not many ways to recycle items from your discard pile. Darkrai V-Star being one of the very few, Silene as a supporter. But Darkrai
Mhm.
V-Star can recycle Ace Specs. And Guzma
Ah.
on an item, is one of the most powerful items we've ever had. You can recycle that from your discard pile. So you can play that Ace Spec, um, basically boss's order on an item or Guzma on an item multiple times. So I think Darkrai will be important there. You can also obviously recycle Dark Patches, recycle energy acceleration. So that's another way, I guess, to sort of continue to stream attacks and to stream energy acceleration. Um, if you at the very last turn you need to just pull two dark patches from the discard pile, double dark patch, and then you can use another frenzy gouging. You can do that with your Darkrai. I don't know if that'll be enough, but I think I mean, obviously, Roaring Moon will not be as good as it is post rotation. There'll be no VIP pass. There'll be no Moltres, but I don't think it'll completely fall off. We'll see how it continues to look.
Right. No, I agree. I think Roaring Moon is here to stay. I think people have really attached themselves to this deck list. And again, once Moltres rotates, once Battle VIP rotates, decks survive. Decks find a way to just keep going, unless you're something like I don't know what maybe Miraidon might be the one deck that might not be able to come back. I'm sure there's a way to make that work with the heavy baton we talked about in the previous set. But otherwise, yeah, I think Roaring Moon again. I think it's going to see a lot of success, and that brings us to our next point here. Actually, Dortmund coming up this weekend. Um, I personally think you're going to see a lot of Roaring Moon. I think you're going to see a lot of Charizard. You're going to see a lot of Gardevoir. This being a European tournament, obviously they play the game a little differently. The philosophy behind deck building is a little different. If we were to go down to Stuttgart, that's obviously quite some time ago. You will see, and that's December 9th,
Mhm.
right down there. You kind of see the same deck list, right? I think some of the things that you're going to see here obviously will not be as relevant as you see, as we're going to see here in Dortmund. That being said, I will say I think European players just a little more diverse. You're going to see a
Yeah,
lot more variety when it comes to deck lists, whereas in America or maybe even Japan, you're just kind of playing the same things over and over again. You're going to hit a lot of mirrors. Whereas in Europe, again, we're just if you just look at this, and again, this is back in December of last year, so it's a bit of an older format. We have a one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight. I think that's 10 different decks in the top 10, incredibly diverse. So I think Dortmund's really going to again kind of double down on that just to show the diversity of the meta. I know earlier I had kind of hinted, hey, Paldean Fates, meta's a little stale. We've really only got two semi-relevant cards in Crisis Shot and Moonlight Hill. We still have a very diverse meta, right? Gholdengo is now a thing. Roaring Moon is now a thing. Charizard's kind of taking a step back. Gardevoir just took regional. There's a bunch of different decks coming to light right now. It's a very wide meta. But for the most part, it's the same stuff over and over again. So that brings me to my next question for you, Will. Who takes it? Who takes Dortmund this weekend?
I mean, yeah, I think I'm tapped into the U.S. mentality, but I think who can ever guess with uh with Europeans? But I think honestly, I think it's going to be some Lost Box deck that's not
Mm,
Tina. My guess is non-Tina Lost Box. I think it's on the
19
rise. I
lost
think
box.
Europeans like those finicky decks like Lost Box, like Gardevoir, like Mew. I don't think it's Mew's time, unfortunately. I think just now that Roaring Moon is a thing, even if it falls off even a little bit, it's still 10% of the meta, 15% of the meta. Roaring Moon just really hurts Mew. So I
Yeah.
think Lost Box. Um, yeah. I mean, there's so many interesting things that people can do with it. I think like the Spear Tomb tech, like the Mawile tech, like some new techs that we might not see coming. It's going to be, I think Lost Zone is on the rise.
To go back to your point, though, real quick, you said Mew is probably going to fall off. Roaring Moon is just too relevant. Rapid Strike, as we see here on 6 and 7, again, this is an older format, has just completely fallen off the face of the planet because of Roaring Moon. You get your Inteleon set up, you get your Urshifu set up, and then they just get bossed up and they get knocked down. There's three prizes gone instantly. So I think again, Roaring Moon is just really going to kind of push away the idea of hey, VMAX is a thing. We're going to be able to continue to play those. I I, I think VMAX is far and away gone. I don't.
Yeah. One hit
I mean, what
knockouts
other
on a
deck is
three.
playing VMAXs?
Yeah, one hit knockouts on a three prizer is just impossible. You cannot survive a Roaring Moon. You cannot.
I mean, back to back boss and the game's over in like 4 turns. So again, I think VMAX is completely gone. It was fun while I was here. Well, some people hated it. I thought it was okay, but for the most part, I think the days of VMAX are gone. Vstar obviously is going to stay around. It's not as much of a prize liability. They tend to have some pretty good abilities in them as well. But yeah, I think VMAX is completely gone.
So you
If you
put
were to
me on the
ask me who's in,
yeah,
I'm
you put
sorry,
me
go
on the
ahead.
spot. What is your guess? What is your guess for
I'm playing Charizard right now, so I want to see it do well. But I think you're right. I think it is going to be some kind of variety of Lost Box. I you can't go wrong with a Giratina guess, but I like the concept of a Roaring Moon, Iron Hands kind of guy getting into the first place spot there at Dortmund. So that's my pick as well. I think it's going to be some kind of Lost Zone box lane. I want to see Iron Hands do well. Iron Hands was such a cool card. It was so hyped up coming into the format. It was something that a lot of people were really behind, and it really hasn't done much. I mean, has Iron Hands been in a tournament winning list since it came out? No, right?
yes, no, I believe it has. Let's look back. I mean, I think it got second at LAIC, so it was in the finals. Iron Hands Miraidon was
Right,
in the finals, but I
right.
believe right after LAIC, it won the next American. When was wait? Is this everything? This can't be everything.
That's
After
everything.
After LAIC, is there where was the next American? San Antonio? Huh. I guess it hasn't. Um, wow. Did it win Brisbane? No. Yeah, I don't think Maridon has won anything since it's been in top eight a lot. I think Maridon has and Maridon Iron Hands has been in a lot of decks that have done well, but yeah, I guess it hasn't taken anything. My hot tip is I mean I may or may not go to Vancouver. I bought a ticket to it. I think I'm gonna go. I think I'm gonna go to Vancouver. I think Maridon is
Really?
the play for Vancouver. Um, I think Maridon is going to finish off strong before it rotates and before it maybe falls off forever. I don't know if it's going to get a win, but I think um, with Lost Box, like I said, rising to the top with these small single prize Pokemon, with Gardevoir potentially even coming back a little bit, the thing that destroys these small single prize Pokemon is Iron Hands. And I think the best Iron Hands deck is Maridon, and I think Maridon will finish off strong for the rest of this format.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I won't be watching the streams, unfortunately. I'll be traveling, spending some time with my lovely wife. But keep me updated. I think Dortmund's going to be a really telling play, a really telling tournament in terms of what we can expect going forward. Because again, Europeans tend to be very creative, unlike us Americans, who we just Charizard go smash or Moon go smash. That's all we really do out here. I think the European tournaments tend to be a little more exciting. I really think we're going to see some really creative decks. That being said, what's a deck that needs to prove itself? If you were to ask me that question, what deck really needs to go out there and say, "Hey, I'm still here. I'm still part of the deal. I'm still relevant." I actually would say it is Miraidon Iron Hands. I think Miraidon Iron Hands has really fallen off these past few weeks. This is a tournament where I think it really needs to say, I'm part of this still. I'm still relevant. I'm still a threat. Because again, I mean, for me, it's a fun deck, really, really cool concept, but I don't really think it's there anymore. I don't know how you feel about that, but
Yeah, no, I
I think
think
Iron Hands Maridon needs to have a good showing.
I think it had hovered around like 15% of the meta share up until Roaring Moon came in, and I think it
Mm.
it attracts very similar types of players. It has a very similar play style. That's why I moved from Miraidon to Roaring Moon. So I don't necessarily know if it is going to have the comeback that you're expecting or wanting. Especially, I also don't think European players necessarily like that style of play. So I don't
Mm.
know if this weekend is it, but I think, looking over the next few weeks and the tournaments that are going to be coming up, and like I said, Vancouver, which I think is the next US tournament, um, I think Maridon will have a showing at Vancouver. I'm just not sure if it'll show up this weekend. Um,
Is that Vancouver, Canada, or is that
Vancouver,
Vancouver?
Canada. So Vancouver,
Oh,
Canada is in 3 weeks. It's
okay,
I guess
okay.
it's the next North American. North
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was
American.
like, really?
I didn't mean U.S. The next American, North American tournament.
Is Orlando, actually. We don't get another tournament in America until April. That's Orlando. Wow. It's quite some time away.
Wait, no,
Jeez.
Vancouver is in March. Oh,
Oh, no, I'm talking about like an
in
American
U
something in
in
like,
U.S. The
yeah,
U.S.
yeah, yeah. In the US, yes, yes, correct,
Got it.
correct.
Sorry, my bad. I don't know if I was saying America or United States, but Canada is technically
It's all good.
America. It's North America. Um,
If we're getting technical, yes, North America, part of the deal. Yeah,
um, so yeah, we have March 16th. It's actually the last tournament in the pre-rotation format. So I think Ryden will show off. I think if you were to ask me the same question, I think Gholdengo needed to prove itself. I think LDF proved it this weekend. I think top 32 is
yeah.
pretty strong. I think it needs to continue to prove itself. I don't think one result is enough. So hopefully there's a few more, top 32s for Gholdengo. Um, Other than that, I think Gardevoir finally had a pop off moment. I don't think it needs to prove itself. Tina doesn't need to prove itself. Charizard doesn't need to prove itself. Roaring Moon, even though it doesn't hasn't won, I think there were two in the top eight. I think it's definitely proven itself. Um, so as far as like those top meta decks, Snorlax, I don't want it to prove itself. Just
Mm.
stay away. Don't prove yourself.
Well, I mean, in Knoxville only had like 3% of the shares, so I
Yeah.
think Snorlax is one of those decks where if you know how to play it well, great, but you really got to understand the meta. You got to understand everyone else's deck and try to understand what they're trying to do. to put yourself in a better position because you're trying to do the same thing every time, right? You get the Snorlax up front, you let it sit there, and you're just kind of waiting for your opponent to deck out. You can't really achieve that without understanding what everyone else is playing. So I think it's really, really important that you have to understand everyone else's deck list, what the strategy is, what's the tech that they're playing for your particular deck, if anything. Obviously, we know decks like Charizard play one switch. That's an auto win for Snorlax. But other decks, we don't see a lot of switch. Escape Rope's rotating soon. So there's a lot of things there with Snorlax. I think I would say it's one of the more interesting decks right now. Miraidon obviously had its time. Charizard's had its time. But Snorlax, up and down, wavering. And again, only 3% over in Knoxville. I don't know if people are over it. People are not really believers. I don't know what the deal is. Like you, I'm happy. I don't want it to come
Yeah.
back. I'm totally fine with never seeing that deck again. But I mean, who knows, right? As you mentioned before, it's really difficult to predict these European tournaments just because there tends to be so much more variety. That being said, I still think it's a lot like you. I think it's going to be a lost zone variety of some sort, some kind of lost box that's going to take the whole thing there in Dortmund. So I'm looking forward to it.
Cloth.
Again, I won't be
Cloth needs to prove
watching, but we'll
itself.
see. Cloth? Oh my God.
I'm
How are
just
you
kidding.
talking about cloth?
I'm joking.
Oh my God. I mean, hey, you never know. I mean, Cloth was doing well for some time there, got on stream a few times. So you never know. You never know. That's really what I'm trying to get at here. All right. Well, we're near the end of today's episode. I don't want to say goodbye without getting to a couple other things here. I know we had talked about Dortmund already. We gave some predictions there. In terms of some specific cards that are going to be legal, Paldean Fates only again has so many cards that are going to be legal. Crisis Shot Cramorant. I kind of hinted at it a little bit earlier. LDF thinks it's actually a pretty good play. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's obviously on paper very, very powerful. 280 damage.
Right.
You attach it to a Cramorant when there's 4 cards in the Lost Zone, it's free. It's 3 energy otherwise. But even if you didn't attach it to Cram, if you attach to anything, Lost Zone decks can accelerate 3 energy with a Mirage Gate and attach. The one problem is it's very, very specific. It has to be when your opponent has 1 prize card remaining. And in a format where there are 2 prizers, I feel like you would have to very specifically, or your opponent could very specifically, if they know it's in your deck list, avoid, taking an odd prize card or avoid having 1 prize card remaining. So make sure they unless they're playing against a single prize deck, which not all Lost Zone decks are single prize decks. I guess some of them are. So if you're a true single prize Lost Zone deck, I think that card is 100% a play. You play that in your deck if you're a single prize Lost Zone deck, because they're always on odd prize cards. They're always going to get to that 1 prize card remaining. But Lost Zone doesn't necessarily do that. Sometimes you need to pull out an Iron Hand. Sometimes you need to pull out a Roaring Moon. Sometimes you put out a Dragonite V, and you're going to get, or you open that 2 prizer. I don't think Tina's going to play that. I think you can avoid. You can play around it. You can not get to that 5. That 1 prize card remaining. It's undeniably a good card. It's just very, very specific decks are going to play it. We haven't seen a ton of single prize Lost Zone decks do amazing. Sablezard, I really like Sablezard, but it also hasn't really popped off. We'll see if that can do it. But you don't even need to play Sablezard anymore because the reason you play Zard is because it can hit 250. You just attach that to a Cram. Now you can put your you can put Greninja back, get a little bit more draw power. You can get those 290 snipes with Greninja as well on top of it. So yeah, Lost Zone decks will get better with this card.
Yes.
We'll see. I don't like Lost Zone that much, so can other decks play this card? I don't think so. I don't think other decks will really play this card.
Post rotation, you might see in Guardy. Even then, it's going to be a difficult thing to pull off. You have a bunch of 1 prize attackers that are going to be taking up the space, but it's going to be interesting. Speaking of Guardy, Moonlit Hill, this is the first time it's going to be legal. A lot of people in Japan aren't really big on this card.
Yeah.
Frankly, neither am I. I know this is something you've been kind of interested in, and maybe you're thinking about. And you're not huge on Guardy right now, but I would say that Moonlit Hill may be a one of. It's not a terrible play, obviously, but there's got to be better stadiums. I mean, there's an Artisan, there's a Collapse Stadium that you can drop in there, and as we saw in the earlier deck list, Gardevoir is running pretty thin on stadiums right now. You're not really putting in, 4 stadiums like you maybe had in the early days of Gardevoir. Moonlit Hill, does it see day two?
Moonlit Hill is, I think, maybe better post rotation. I think the best card that it
Mm,
actually works with is Drifloon, which
yep.
is interesting because it's doesn't uh it attacks for 30 damage for every energy that's on it, but it only has like 60 or 70 HP. So normally you can't attach that many energy to this Drifloon by accelerating with your Gardevoir. It can only take like 2 or 3 energy, and then that's maxed out on damage. But if you're able to heal it a little more with that Moonlit Hill, then attach a couple more, obviously also use a cape or a charm or whatever. Um, I think that could be good. Right now, Gardevoir doesn't play Drifloon, so I think Drifloon will actually be a big attacker post rotation. This stadium will then become more interesting post rotation, but right now it doesn't really do anything. It also allows you basically to attach one more to your Shining Arcana Gardevoirs, which sometimes you just can't quite attach enough to that Shining Arcana Gardevoir to get that 330 HP attack off on a Charizard. But it is too there's no stadium search, and when you're playing a thin line, when you're only playing
Mm,
2 stadiums, you're never going to get that stadium exactly when you want it. You're never
right.
going to get it, drop it the exact turn that you need to get that one extra energy attachment to your Shining Crown Gardevoir. So yeah, it is just too specific.
Yeah, I agree. I think when the card was first released, there was a big uproar here in America saying, "Why don't we have this card yet? It's so good. I can't wait to play it." And now we have it, and everyone's like, "Well, I don't really like it. It's just kind of mid, right?" So I think it was one of those decks or one of those cards, I should say, where everyone got super hyped about it, thought it was gonna be great, and on paper it looks good, but in practice, I don't think it's there. Speaking of a deck, and I know we're gonna be wrapping things up fairly soon here, Espathra. It's a meme. Everyone agrees it's a meme. But over and under, or do we see a deck list including Espathra in day two in Dortmund?
No,
No
just
chance. No chance at
unequivocally
all.
no, zero chance.
Even with the popularity of Moon?
Yeah, no, I don't think it. I don't even think it's that good a matchup against Moon. Honestly, I don't think it's that good a matchup. Can it take a one? If Moon is just has 3 energy attached, right? It does 30 damage for every energy attached to itself and the
Right.
opponent's active. So if it has 3 energy attached and you have 3 energy attached, it does 6 times 30 is 180. Like it's not doing enough damage. It slows you down. It makes you have to attach an extra.
Isn't it a grass type? Isn't it hitting for weakness?
Oh, is Espathra a grass type?
I think well, it's a terrestrial. I think that's what's going on here.
Oh,
Let me double check here. I want to be sure because I think in
uh,
the video games it is a psychic
it's
type.
a
I want
psychic
to
type,
say
but it
I
is
don't
a
know.
terrestrial. It is terrestrial.
It is terrestrial, yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I could see this, you know, barely getting into it's in creep into day two. I would be stoked to see one of these things in day two. Is it a deck I'm ever going to play personally? No, I'm not really that interested in it. But to see something like this make day two again just kind of widens the meta a little bit more. Will it be relevant forever? Obviously not. But seeing it in day two, I think would be really, really cool. I don't think it's a bad matchup with Moon. Obviously, being basic Pokemon, you can throw in Pokemon League headquarters, I believe is the name of that stadium.
Mm,
That says basic
mm.
Pokemon require one more energy to attack, which is a big deal for Moon. Obviously, against Zard, where you could say this is like the next best matchup, I wouldn't agree with that at all. I've heard that quite a bit. Just because you're a grass type doesn't mean you auto win against a dark type. I think we need to kind of get out of that mentality. Um, and plus Charizard's only putting 2 energy per Charizard anyway, so you're gonna have to just funnel a bunch of energy to the Spathra to make that even work. I think we get one. I'm gonna say just to be devil's advocate
I
here, we'll see one in day two, just for fun.
think we have a better shot of like trying to think of a meme deck like Wings of Union or United Wings getting in day two.
Oh my god! Hey, you never know, man. You never know. That's what makes Pokemon fun.
We also get a new. I mean, speaking of new cards that that are new to this format, there's a new United Wings card. that little people haven't really talked about it,
Mhm.
but Paldean Fates adds a new United Wings card, Kilowattrel.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in our final thoughts here, Dortmund, anything else you want to expand on before we jump into a new segment here on our podcast, Blaine's quiz. We're going to jump more into that later on. Final thoughts with Dortmund. It seems like you and I are in agreement on who we think is going to take the whole thing. Anything else you want to drop on Dortmund before we move on?
No, I think that's it. I think we've said everything that I wanted to say about Dortmund.
Awesome, good stuff. Well, we're gonna be, I guess you could say, introducing a new segment to the podcast. This is the first time we're going to be doing this. It's going to be called Blaine's Quiz, and the concept is really quite simple. Each week, Will or myself will pick a Pokemon, and then we have to have the other person guess. If you get the guess right away, don't have to worry about anything. It's going to be 40 points if you use the first tip. It's going to minus 10, a second tip minus 20, a third tip minus 30. We don't really have an idea of what we're going to be doing at the end of the year with all these points, but we'll figure something out. Maybe some kind of giveaway if we have a decent amount of audience listening. What's it based off of? Pokédex entries. As we know, the Pokédex is in depth. It's a very large, wide piece of document. It's a very large document that really encompasses Pokemon as a whole. It really just talks about every single Pokemon. Any Pokemon that's ever existed has a Dex entry. So for our first episode, I get to pick the Pokemon, and Will, you'll be guessing. So just
I'm
to review
nervous
very
about
quickly
this.
here,
I'm
yeah,
nervous.
it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. Tip one, and you don't have to use your tips. If you know what it is right away, just let it rip. But if you don't, we can go tip by tip here. Tip one is what stage is it? So basic stage one, stage two. Tip two would be what generation. We have, I believe, 9 generations now, so that's kind of a lot, but I might be able to kind of narrow things down for you. And then what species it is. So the famous one, obviously, being Pikachu, an electric mouse Pokemon. So think of it very similar to that. All right, Will, are you ready for the first game
Oh,
of
I'm ready.
Blaine's quiz?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. Here is the Pokédex entry for this particular Pokemon. Here we go. This Pokemon's horn can crush even uncut diamonds. One sweeping blow of its tail can topple a building. This Pokemon's hide is extremely tough. Even direct cannon hits don't leave a scratch.
Has a tail that has a horn, and it's very tough.
Yeah, pretty good.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, that could be anything, right? But
What?
yeah,
Uh,
can
I mean,
topple buildings with its tail and
it
crush
has a
diamonds with its
horn.
horn.
It has a horn. Like Rhydon? Rhydon has a horn.
Well, you got it, man. That was it.
Boom.
I'm right on
Yeah.
that. Oh, I have 40 points on the board right away. Well, I
Boom.
don't know what you're nervous about, man. You knocked that out instantly. That was like what, 10 seconds of contemplating? Like you knocked that out instantly, man. Let me get you
I don't know.
on
I
the
was thinking
board here.
Rhyperior. I was thinking Rhyperior because I was like, I don't think you're going to pick a Gen 1 right off the rip. I thought you'd go for something a little more obscure. But
So I was debating before this. I was like, do
yeah,
I go with Arceus or Arceus, whatever people
yeah.
pronounce it? I was thinking maybe we go with that. Maybe we go
But the
Bulbasaur.
dex
Maybe do
entry
Mew.
for Arceus has got to be like, it's the god of
It's
Pokemon, right? Like,
it's way too obvious. I mean,
yeah,
I don't think we're ever going to use it. I can bring it up real quick here just to kind of have a little fun with it. But
yeah,
basically, it was born out of an egg or something, and it built the universe with its 1,000 arms, like some crazy mythological concept behind
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Really, really cool. But yeah, I think it was just going to be way, way too obvious. If we just go here real quick, it is said to have emerged from an egg in a place where there was nothing, then shaped the world. So, I mean, what else is
Yeah.
capable of doing
Shape
that?
the
Maybe
world. I think
Giratina?
I would have said
I don't
Arceus.
know. Yeah, yeah. So again, I that was my second guess, but I wasn't gonna actually read that one off too. I just figured it was way, way too easy. So yeah, happy I didn't go with that one.
Wow, right on
Well,
first guess. I have to be nice to you then. I was gonna go for something really obscure, but I guess I'll go. I'll
no,
be
go
nice to
for it.
you.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, no. If you want to be super scared, if you want to drop I don't know, a Minccino on me, like go for it. Like I have no problem with that. I mean, the whole point of the game is it's meant to be fun. Well, congrats, Will. You're on the board, 40 points, no tips right away. You're in the lead. Um, I have to get perfect score next time for me to even start maintaining because if you start knocking these things out, all of a sudden I'm way behind. So congrats, Will. You got 40 points on
Thanks.
the board, and we'll play again next week. Obviously, you will be the one to pick, and I'll be the one to guess. With that being said, is there anything else you want to drop before we say goodbye to our as we joked last week, our two listeners today.
No, I think I got everything I wanted to say. Is there any last minute thoughts you had about anything Pokemon related?
Pal World. Go play Pal World. I haven't played it yet, but there's some stuff going on there. It looks like a lot of fun. I know we're a Pokemon podcast, but uh, Pal World. It's cheaper. It looks better. It looks funner. I know
Until
we're
there's
here
a
talking about Pokemon, but
until there's Pal World
Pokemon, link
TCG,
together.
until there's trading cards,
Oh my God.
I'm
Can you
not gonna.
imagine? Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I mean, if we're talking about TCG very, very quickly here, MetaZoo just recently announced
Oh
they're
yeah,
wrapping it up. They're closing doors, and they said, "Hey, we're done. Pokemon's just way too big." Lorcana, I'm sure, had a big factor in that. The Disney TCG. MetaZoo, it's gone, unfortunately. So if you see MetaZoo sitting around, I don't know if it's going to be worth money in 20 years like
I saw
Pokemon
some
was,
at
but
a store. I saw some at a store I
really,
was at, but I was
wow.
like, do I want to really? I've never bought this before. I'm only gonna buy it now just because it went out of business. Like, yeah, I don't know.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I might pick up maybe one thing just to have in the collection, and then tell my kids in 3 years, "Hey, here's a game that was around for 6 months and no one ever played it." But that's all right, nothing to worry about there. Well, folks, that's all we got for you today on the EXP Share podcast. Thank you for tuning in. You can find us on all the meta relevant, the big podcast stations, Spotify, Apple, and of course, you can go check us out on YouTube as well. That being said, appreciate your time today. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care now.